I'd called myself queer because I didn't feel like a lesbian, but I didn't know the words to explain what I felt like. And I didn't know the words to explain what my gender was. And people started to talk to me about this whole non-binary, this binary trans and this non-binary trans, or gender queerness and things like that. And I just went, ooh, ew. This might be the thing that you might want to look into. And it really just became that.
I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, a podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories they created there, and the people that they used to know. Dr. J is a photographer, occasional producer, DJs when they can, and was a performer of, quote, spoken word performance art, end quote, which is the best description of whatever they did on stage. Their motto or artist statement is, if we are not visible, we cannot demand the world make space for us. They are privileged to be able to be visible and are currently sidling up to the patriarchy to convince it to smash itself. We met to discuss Her Upstairs, a short-lived bar that sprung up in Camden, London after the closure of iconic venue The Black Cap and ran from 2016 to 2018.
I do weird pronouns because my pronoun is normally they, but when I'm in queer spaces I use she. Because, well, it's she because she gets taken, usually the people who call me she have taken me from they, from seeing me as a woman in any way, all the way out to queer, and all the way back into that whole drag circle of hark at her and that very she kind of focus. So like, It's really weird, but it feels very comfortable within a queer space to be she. But it's because people are seeing me not as a woman, but as this kind of strange drag creature that's gone out and back again. You seem confused by that.
I'm not sure.
Because pronouns can be situational as well.
Okay.
So I can give you an example, like having a conversation at Her Upstairs about, in the smoking area, about using popping candy during oral sex with a couple of people. And we're discussing sex and being quite explicit, and we're all using she as a pronoun, all the four people standing around. And then I say to one of them that when Maria used popping candy on me, I basically hit the ceiling, and Maria's now actually writes a piece called Things I've Broken During Sex, which includes my partner's love of popping candy. And Ashley turned around and said, why don't you just wear a condom because it feels really good? And I turned and said, I don't think that would have any benefit on me. And that was the first time that anyone in that group had considered what my physicality was, what my queerness was, what compared to their queerness and our expressions of queer. But we all use she as a pronoun within that space because it's that kind of very old school camp, almost she of like saying there's a femininity about us, but it's gone out and back again, if that makes sense.
Okay, I'm not 100% that.
You sound so confused.
But is it like, so when you're talking about old school, if you're like harking back to that kind of stereotype of the 70s queer man who would use she to describe his male friends? Yes,
hark at her, her rear, blah blah blah. I don't do Polari very well. But it's almost like that part of the drag scene has taken that and bent it even in weirder ways as well. So like, I refer to people as she even when they're in their boy clothes because I know them as a drag queen.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but it's all about which pronoun people are liking.
Yeah.
And I don't, and it's one of those things of I like being she within that space because it puts me into that group of effeminate masculinity or femininity of playing a campness and a unexpected effeminacy.
Okay.
Or I can't say the word right.
Shall we practice?
Femness. Femininity. But it's like I'm not mask, and people don't see me as quite femme either. But I've got that kind of camp.
Yeah. But so, how do people
know?
Yeah, how do people know which pronoun to use?
So at work, I always wear a little badge that's got they on.
Yeah.
And I've got that on my business cards, I've got that in my email, everything like that. So people who know me via work know me as they.
Yeah.
People who know me in queer spaces, I've generally just used she. I've not gone up and gone, if I was at all concerned, I'd say, oh, would you mind using they? And nobody would give a damn.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's almost like negotiated.
Yes,
It's a bit like consent, although consent's trickier, obviously, than pronouns. Pronouns is pretty simple. This is a pronoun I'd like.
Yes, yeah. and then you have to kind of give them permission to make mistakes, I suppose.
Yeah, and I haven't even asked which pronoun you preferred, despite the fact that I spent 3 hours photographing you one time and all of that, and I just never even thought twice to ask.
Yeah, and I don't think I've thought enough about what I prefer. I kind of am just like, whatever. Like, because I've been referred to he for most of my life, unless people are referring to me derogatorily. Ooh, it's a word I can't pronounce. Then I'm just, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's one of those funny, weird, queer things. I know that at work when people there's a difference between using she for me when the people aren't seeing me as queer and aren't seeing my gender and aren't seeing the queerness of who I am.
Yeah.
And that annoys me. Whereas when people use she and it's used where I know that they can see all the queerness and all of that I am, and they're using she in a kind of strange reflection of that.
Yeah.
It makes me feel comfortable.
But is that you making assumptions about people at work?
No, because I think you can tell when people are doing things deliberately.
Yeah.
Like, you feel it in the bottom of your belly. You feel that microaggression. You feel that push against you. You feel that I'm trying to get under your skin slightly kind of thing of like, or sometimes people are saying it without even thinking twice.
Yes, yeah.
And there's a difference in their tone of voice. There's a difference in how it looks and also the rest of the sentence. It's not just that word, it's the rest of the sentence and things like that. And it's funny at work, I've got a couple of new people on my team. One of them had a little bit of problems at times of remembering my pronouns I'm now she, they. Which is really sweet. And I know that eventually it'll sort out for them.
Yeah.
Whereas for most people at work, they've gotten really used to using they for me.
Yeah. But how do you feel about queer as a word? Because I have noticed, I'm quite comfortable using that word now because of the spaces that I'm in and since it's been kind of reclaimed and become used more frequently. But I've noticed around non-queer people, when I say queer, they can bristle a bit and they feel maybe that they don't have permission to also use that word.
Yeah. So before I came out, when I was a small child in the 70s and 80s in New Zealand, my dad used to refer to me as being queer as a £3 note. So I think my dad had me well and truly labelled a long, long time before I did. But it's kind of one of those things of it's always been... It was the word that I used when I started to describe my gender and sexuality. Or it started to describe my sexuality. It just seemed to be the one that fitted, even if it didn't quite know the history of the word. But I've never had it, apart from its slightly humorous intent from my father, had it used as an epithet. I've never had anyone use it to swear at me. I've never had it used in anger at me. So I understand why there are some people who, when I use it, especially older people, bristle and kind of go, I'm not so comfortable with that word. And I'm like, I totally understand. I'm comfortable with it, but I want to find a way of describing myself. And then I talk about what it means about being non-normative, being that far outside of the normal. And I kind of like that description of it. I'm comfortable with that. When people bristle, I've had some people bristle and go, I thought that was an offensive term. And it's like, yeah, it used to be an offensive term. Allow me to talk to you about the history of queer and the history of identity and why being outside of this normative structure is called queer. And most of the time people are like, oh. And then I refer them to books where people who could actually write about queer in a sane and sensible way, they can read about it. So I send them off to MJ Barker's book, The Graphic History of Queer. And there's a couple of others that I can think of. I mean, Translate Me by C.N. Lester is also another one that really explains queer in a really good comprehensive way. I mean, but when you're sitting in big corporate offices and trying to get people to understand that if I use the word queer, I've got, my friend Joe has a tattoo on his arm that's got, kind of looks like a mother with the heart and the dagger and the scroll, old style tattoo with the word faggot on it. and because he's reclaiming it, because he gets called it so often. And that to me is really powerful, but it's also not a word that I can use. It's not a word that I could use to describe me. Because it's not ever really been used for me in any kind of serious way. It's never been used. It doesn't get yelled at me in the street. Yeah. People don't tend to yell at me in the street. They tend to go, why is the children's TV entertainer dancing around with a huge grin on their face and dancing? Is this part of like a flash mob of one person or something silly like that? It's the advantage of
only when you get the balloon animals out there.
Oh, absolutely. It's the advantage of having bright blue hair and wearing like every single colour under the rainbow. Like, I become somebody else's problem. When I used to do when I did Dungeons and Dragons back in New Zealand, we used to have this joke called somebody else's problem field. Of if you're so outrageous, you're so out there, you become somebody else's problem. Because everyone looks at you and goes, I'm not even going to go and approach that person and ask why they're there, because it's somebody else's problem. And I've discovered it. It's like, I used to have a floor-length leopard print coat. And when I wore that on the buses in and out of town on a Friday or Saturday night up to the Masters Club or something like that, I could stand there at the bus stop and nobody would approach me. Even lost people would look at me and then they'd walk to somebody else and ask for directions. And then I'd step over and offer them directions and they'd look horrified. And I realised that I was so loudly dressed. Everyone was like, how can you wear clothes like that in public and talk to people? And it's like, because you become somebody else's problem. You're so out there, nobody's going to have a go. This is part of my whole being visible thing. Because if you're that visible and you're confident with it, nobody says things. Whereas if you're trying to look like everyone else and you're not able to be confident, people spot the chinks. Yeah. And that happened to me a couple of times, where people would say things like, oh, what do you expect being dressed like that? Or what do you expect being like that in public? And rather than mousing down more, because I was being yelled at on a bus, being called a batty boy and dyke, and I love the fact that those two words could be used by the same person about me. Kind of says that my gender's so confusing, people can't even figure out what I am enough to abuse me correctly. But it's just, and then when you look around for help, people say, well, what do you expect being dressed like that on a bus? What do you expect? And it's like, I just went, no, I'll be that louder. But that takes a lot of energy. That takes a lot of being stable in a lot of the rest of your life.
Yes, yeah.
So...
Well, yeah, I mean, because even, going back to the beginning of our conversation, the explaining words to people and explaining their use, I find that really exhausting. So going that step further and being that bold version of yourself... I would find that exhausting.
It is exhausting, but it's also I joke. Well, I don't joke about it. I'm lucky in that I can be visible because I aren't vulnerable at anything. Like, my job supports me. My partner supports me. My housing isn't dependent on my identity. My immigration status is fine. You know, all of these things. If one of these things was a bit of a bit more of a problem, I would want to step away from it. I wouldn't want to be that visible. But because I've got that privilege, I'm really lucky that I can actually be that visible. I can just be out there. And it means, you know, you bust open the doors a little bit. You know, I sat in a room with a senior partner from a global law firm, talking to them about what it means to be genderqueer on Thursday afternoon, because we met at a Christmas party. And they invited me in for coffee, and I sat and had a conversation, and we're going to continue that conversation. But they were like, I'd never met anyone that I could ask these questions of. But you were there in t-shirt, and everyone out, you can imagine what the Christmas party was like. Everyone was power dressed. Everyone was in business suits and that stuff. And I turned up in jeans and a jumper that had a loud tiger print on the front and bright green hair, and was just chatting to people as if that was complete, as if I looked like them. And he found that really interesting, to have that much confidence to be that different. And I was like, yeah, it was a good mental health day. If it wasn't a good mental health day, I probably would have run away after 15 minutes. But that's the price that I pay. Is there are some days where my mental health is just like, nah, I'm not going to do that. I'll just stay home, or I go into work and I'm just like, I'll just message people and just go, not having a good day. And people at work are like, okay, what can we do to help you? Oh, if you could do this talk or if you could run this session, and I'll back you up. That's all that I need today. And it's like, yep, we can do that.
Yeah.
But you've got to be really lucky to be able to be that vulnerable with people.
Yeah.
Because not many workplaces allow you to be that vulnerable and that kind of flexible. Play around. Yeah. It costs to look this. Well, actually, I say it costs to look this good. I'm wearing essentially my pajamas. Well, no, it's
so you dressed up for me. Great.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's my scruffy house clothes. You know, I am about to go out in public wearing this, because I've got to go back up to work and pick things up. But I really am. Wow, this is the least put together I've been in weeks.
Well, it says a lot that you feel this comfortable to...
or I am this...
Or you care this little about me.
I am this exhausted.
Okay, so shall we talk about her upstairs?
Yes.
But just a bit of clarity, because you've been talking about Block Bar.
So, yeah, it's one of those things that they blended... To me, they blended together because it was the same people.
Okay.
So I did that big festival, the Queerest of the Queer, at the end of 2015. And after that, I was broken. I was broken, because it did many fabulous things and many not quite so fabulous things, and was kind of sorting all of that out. And at the time, the Black Cap had either just closed or was closing.
Yeah.
And then Block Bar opened just up the road.
Yeah.
And Meth and Joe and the Family Fierce moved from the Black Cap up to the Block Bar. So I went to Block Bar quite a lot because they had the same people who I knew. They were my friends. It was a new space. It was relatively quiet. I could go in and catch up with people. And then I had a look at it. That was about the end of 2015, and then by the end of 2016, Meth and Joe and a couple of others had created Her Upstairs, which was in the top half of the Block Bar. And then about 9 months later, they got the lease on the downstairs as well. So you had Her Upstairs and them downstairs.
Okay, yeah.
So you kind of had this multi-level space.
So
it went through three.
So it started off as just the Block Bar.
And
then upstairs, and then above Block Bar
became
was
Her Upstairs.
And then Block Bar disappeared, and then became them downstairs.
Yeah. And
cool.
so Her Upstairs and them downstairs became the one venue.
Yeah.
But they had kind of two spaces, and I loved the names that they came up with were just so brilliant for them. You know, Her Upstairs and them downstairs is just really fab. And it had a smoking area out the back that was like the social hub. It had really good performance space upstairs, and downstairs was more of a dance space. With a little bit of performance space, a long, thin performance space. Whereas upstairs, I think this is due to Meth and Joe both working as academics. Well, Joe working as an academic in performance and Meth doing stage design and things like that. They crafted a really good performance space within the space that they had upstairs, so that there was lots of ways you could see the stage, you could use the stage in different ways, and it was really cool. And it was easy to decorate.
So shall we just cycle back quickly
and
talk about Queerest of the Queer?
Oh god. So we did a festival. I woke up one morning and said, I know, let's run a festival. And everyone went, okay. And I went, let's do it at the Coronet. And everyone went, yeah, sure. And then I said, let's do it across 12 hours. And everyone went, yeah, that sounds fine. And I said, and let's have, how about 5 stages? Because it's 5 different performance spaces. And everyone went, that's brilliant. And I said, well, to do that, we're going to need about 80 artists. And nobody said no. At any point in time during this, of no, that's a little bit much. You're a bit insane. What the hell are you doing? So we ended up with Latrice Royale as our headliner. We had Johnny Wu and his band. We had, there's books around here somewhere with everyone who performed, and if I forget anyone, I'm just going to end up in so much trouble. So, and on top of that, we had 80 other artists. We had Bourgeois Maurice on stage. Yeah. So the whole idea was, as a photographer, was at the time running around London, and I realised that I was seeing all this amazing performance, but the crowds were different, and they were never mixing, and even the performers were never mixing. So I would see performers at Bar Whatever, I'd see performers at Bethnal Green Workingmen's Club at some of the different nights. I was just out most nights of the week, and I would see all these different performers, but they never seemed to see each other, and those crowds never seemed to see each other. And one of the things that I realised listening to people is everyone felt quite isolated, that they had these little pockets of community, and most of the spaces only hold maybe 100 people. So you only see those same people, and you don't realise how big the actual queer community is in London. So that was the entire idea, get it all together, mix it up in one space across 12 hours with 5 stages and 80 artists. But I was the one managing everything, making sure all the money went in and went out, and went out and went out, and then I woke up and went, oh my god, how much money do I owe to who? And then went, okay, well, HMRC are now chasing me, so you can all just stand in line. And it took me about a year, about 18 months to clear everything out.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
So that's when I say that I was broken. Yes. I woke up going, okay. So that was a brilliant event, and it did so much of the stuff you wanted to do. How do you get out of this mess?
Yeah.
Without declaring yourself bankrupt, and ensure that everyone who works got paid. And that was one of the big things that I totally have, because so much of what we do as performers and as producers and that relies on goodwill of people. And I see big events that can get a lot of money but don't pay that many people. They rely on volunteers, and that means that there's a lot of people who want to get involved who just can't. So everyone who worked for me, I think there's one person who had a bit of a raw deal, and I felt sorry for them, but everyone else, with what they signed, they pretty much got paid minimum wage for everything that they did, because I realised that I was competing with their minimum wage jobs in bars and cafes and everywhere else. So if I paid them, they could come along and take part in it, and that worked for the most part. So everyone ended up being paid. HMRC ended up being paid and didn't take me to court. But yeah, Queerest of the Queer, great experiment, but it's queer, and queers ain't got money. And no matter how much we tried to cut things, we just couldn't get enough in to make it float in any way to do it again. So Yeah, queerest to the queer.
Yeah.
Ambitious, fun. What is it? Even now, when Maria describes it, she's like, we ran a festival. It was 12 hours, 5 stages, 80 plus artists. Insane. And I think if I ever suggested doing anything like that again, there would be at least 3 people who would just tackle, well, actually 4 people I know of, who would just tackle me to the ground and go, no, seriously, please don't ever try anything like that again.
Yeah, cap it at 60 artists
yeah,
at least.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
So that was a difficult time in your life.
Yeah.
And around that time is when Black Cap closed as well. And Block Bar sprung up to fill the gap that it left.
Or I think they kind of took advantage of the fact that some of the good performers and the people who could organise performance from the Black Cap were available to hire, so brought them in and basically did that. And then, I had the amazing Family Fierce. I kind of had a group of people. I was trying to think of how to describe them, and I was going to use the word whānau, and then realise very few people other than the New Zealanders will go, I know what that means.
Yeah, I have no idea.
And it's kind of your people. It's kind of the people who you connect with. So is
it a Maori word?
It's a Maori word, and it's, to me, which may be slightly not quite getting the interpretation perfect, but it's about not just blood family, but chosen family. That logical and biological family mix is your whānau. And because I don't have any biological family here, it's all my logical family. And essentially, there was a logical family, there was a group that I could go along and be with while I was this broken, trying to figure out what I was going to do, trying to get a job again, kind of. Fortunately, I was working freelance, so I just picked up the job that I'd put down for a couple of weeks, and they were fine with that. But it was very much just trying to find where I fitted in that space, and everyone who I met there was just so welcoming and lovely, and didn't care that I was sitting in the corner going, another email, and they were like, it's okay. So what did you think of the performance? And we'd talk about photography, or I'd capture what was going on stage, and just enjoy the people who were there.
And so had you been a regular at Black Cap?
Not so much. So I was a regular down at the RVT a lot, and I'd gone to some stuff at the Black Cap, but it's that north-south divide. I live south of the river. And then just with people, I just moved up. I ended up socialising more up in that North London corner. And that became not quite my manner, but it was, when I changed jobs, it was all not quite on the way home, but I could get there quite easily, and that made a difference.
Okay. Did you meet the Family Fierce through the venue or prior to the venue opening? And we should say, so the Family Fierce is a drag troupe? What am I supposed to call it?
Family, I think, would be the one that's closest.
It is in the name, after all.
It's in the name, yeah. And so Meth is the mother. Joe is #boyfriend Joe, but it's now #husband Dr. Joe. Or Dr. Husband Joe. I don't think we've quite figured out which way around to do it. There was Ruby Wednesday. I'm going to forget somebody. There's Bourgeoisie. There's Maxine Moore, Lolo Brow, Scarlett O'Hara, Lily Snatchdragon. I think that's who was the core group that I ended up meeting most. And I know that there were people who were in and then were out, and I said Ruby Wednesday, didn't I? Yeah. Just having that blank of trying to remember who's
that pressure
who
of like, it's like
pressure of remembering the names of the family. But I'd known Meth for a while, a long time, and then we'd been circling around different, because they were performing under another name on a more burlesque scene, and then they got slightly more into drag and performed at a couple of spaces, and then we were up in Manchester together for a couple of gigs, and and took some photos of them up there. This all came out at their 30th. So I actually brought the pictures along to everyone, which nothing like knowing somebody long enough to bring out the baby photos. And then they were doing some more interesting stuff. They did some brilliant pantos at the Black Cap, and that was I had 2 or 3 years of pantos that I took of them doing it at the Black Cap, which I really, really enjoyed. They were different. They were, if I say their sense of humour matched mine, their sensibilities matched mine. I didn't have to have that moment of going, that joke's tiny little bit on the racist side, or as an assigned female at birth person, I found that comment just a little bit
Yeah.
That's not to say hashtag all drag, but there's still sometimes those moments where you go along to something.
Did you just say hashtag all drag?
Hashtag not all drag. Hashtag not all drag. Hashtag not RuPaul's drag. But there's things that sometimes happen from stage.
Yeah.
And especially with some of the pantos.
Stereotypes, that kind of...
Yeah. And you see things done and you're just like, I can get that you're trying to make fun of it, but you've just played a stereotype.
Yeah. And it's just lazy, isn't it?
And it just doesn't feel that good. Or you've made a comment and it just feels really and I don't see a lot of that. So to say places where I haven't seen it is the Glory, Bar Whatever, and anything that was happening at the Black Cat when Meth was doing it, Block Bar and her upstairs, then downstairs. Those were the spaces where I didn't feel that there was that moment. Oh, and Shit Show at the Glory. So there's stuff that happens at the Glory that feels in that right space.
Yeah.
And there's occasionally a show or something and I'm like, but I'm not at the Glory, but it'll be in other spaces. You see something and you're a bit like, oh, that joke didn't quite land.
Yes, yeah. Or like we're suddenly back in the 90s.
Yeah, or the 70s, or the 60s. And that was also one of the interesting things when they did Not Another Drag competition and we had it at times at Bar Whatever with the open mic. It's not what's said from stage, it's what's said afterwards. So if somebody says something or ad-libs something or does something that, and you're just like, seriously, did you get anyone who wasn't white to look at this? Or seriously, did you get anyone that wasn't a cis man to look at this and just think about it? And it's not, it's that happens, but it's how the people respond to it. And I think it's an important lesson, and I think we had to learn it a little bit at Queerest of the Queer. It's not that first blow, it's the second blow. It's your response to that. That's really super important. You can try and be as good, you can brief people, you can make sure that people understand sensibilities and are, I won't say woke, but are as woke as possible. And not in a bad way, but in that being aware of their privileges, being aware of minorities. If you don't address it when it goes wrong, that's when it's wrong. That's when it's really wrong. Yeah, and it's how you address
slips
it.
Up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of stuff that happens occasionally from stage where you're trying to do 3 or 4 things and you try to ad-lib or you try to respond to a question or you say something and your brain just comes out with something and you're like, okay. And it's how you respond and it's how you turn that around. And it's how you as a promoter also turn that around, and you as a producer of a show turn that around.
But it's kind of that thing, isn't it? Like our conditioning not allowing us to say, oops, I did the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And to just be defensive and to double down on that thing. Yeah.
It's about turning around and saying, and my partner, I know there's a picture of Stormzy out behind you, so people who don't know, there's a really great artist called Wes who does these brilliant prints of Stormzy on wallpaper and found materials and things like that, and I've got one which I totally love because he's got like this pink and blueness about him. One of the reasons I have so much affection for Stormzy is when those homophobic tweets from when he was 17, 18 popped up, he owned up and apologised. He didn't double down. He didn't do the J.K. Rowling blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
I know. He said, I shouldn't have said those things. I was dumb. They were wrong to say then. They would be very wrong to say now. I shouldn't have said those things. I apologise I apologise for the offence that I caused. Not that you felt offended. I apologise for the offence that I caused.
Yeah.
And then goes out of his way to be a better role model. And I'm like, that's exactly what you need, rather than this either doubling down or saying, oh no, but it was fine to say that then, or it was a different time.
Yeah.
You know, it's like...
or even just what you've just said, like, I'm sorry if you were hurt. I'm sorry if you reacted to this.
Yeah.
Not like my actions were my actions and so what, but if you were hurt, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And that to me is the best non-apology. I mean, that is a total non-apology. I'm sorry but when you say I'm sorry for any offence that was caused, you're apologising for the fact that somebody has reacted to what you said. You know, it's not that... It's just wording it the right way round. And being mindful of those different sensations of your offence being seen, or your hurt being seen, and your hurt not being seen. Or your hurt being dismissed. It's like when you were asking about the mispronouncing, and how that feels. It's my hurt in that is sometimes dismissed, of like, oh no, well, they didn't mean it seriously. And it's like, no, they did, because I can tell. I can tell the difference. And it's that minimization of hurt that this whole snowflake idea kind of perpetuates, which is so untrue. Because people are still hurting. You just you need to own up to the fact that you've hurt somebody.
And it's just because you've grown up in a world where it's been okay to say this, it's not wrong for someone to point out that it's not okay.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my mother's never going to Google this. I grew up in a culture of systemic racism, and I didn't really appreciate it until about 3 or 4 years back. How racist, not in a Ku Klux Klan way or anything, but how systemically racist my upbringing was. And I feel very guilty for that, but I also can't go back in time and change it. Much as I'd love to be the Doctor and a Time Lord, I can't go back in time and change that, but I can change how I act now. And I can turn around and say, yeah, I used to think like that. I understand how you're thinking like that. This is the way to think about it now. You know, I get oppressed for so many things. I've never been oppressed because of the colour of my skin. I've never been oppressed because of the country of my birth.
So one of the things, so we will land on talking about the venue eventually. But
I'm loving the way let's talk about the venue by taking a very long
tangential way. I'm really interested in talking about what you've said about drag. I know I've had quite a few conversations with people about how drag is anti-feminist, and you've just been talking about the drag that you avoid when it's misogynistic or in any way
racist or transphobic or homophobic. There is homophobic drag.
All the icks,
All the I like that. All the icks.
Like, how did you get into drag?
I loved it because it's a performance, and performance for me is everything. Like, we perform. Judith Butler. I've never read her. I just live her. Because I perform gender all the time. I perform who I am. I'm a massive fan of Quentin Crisp. Even I know that he went a little bit downhill in his last... Slightly problematic. But his early stuff is brilliant, because his stuff from the 1970s really spoke to me as a queer kid. When I say queer kid, as a queer in my 20s and 30s, struggling to understand what that meant to be. Having somebody go, you can live on your own, you can go out into the world and be dramatic and be this quiet person who your house is your backstage where you prepare for your entrance into the world and things like that. That sensibility that everything was a performance really, really struck home. And when I came to London, I started to watch performance, and I really, really fell into a love of different styles of performance. And one of the things that I found interesting was drag takes gender and does, when it's good, does amazing things with it. It's misogynistic when it's fishy, when people are using the words fishy, when people are using the terms that would put down any woman in the audience or anyone who is assigned female at birth in the audience, would make them feel lesser than anyone else in the room. It's misogynistic when it's like women can't do drag, or if you're assigned female at birth you can't do drag. I just described
or if you're
a whole
trans,
plethora. If you're a trans person, or if you're trans people can't do drag, or people with beards shouldn't do drag, or people without beards shouldn't do drag, or all of these different things. And it's like, no, drag should be open to anyone who wants to try it, and it's about performative gender.
Yeah.
I've seen Cheryl perform as a basilisk. Basilisks have no gender.
A what?
Sorry, I was just trying to think of a really good example of non-misogynistic drag, and I'm like, wow, Cheryl Hole performing the at a Harry Potter night, basically writhing on the ground like a basilisk.
Oh, it's okay. This is a Harry Potter thing.
A Harry Potter reference. It was a Harry Potter themed night, and literally you're screaming with laughter. And this is one of the best dancers in the business, rolling around on the floor being a basilisk, and you're just like, this is more insane than insane. This is crazy. This is beautiful and wonderful, and playing around with what it means to do drag. You know, can disabled people do drag? Of course they can. Can what is it? Drag syndrome.
Yes, yeah.
I love the fact.
Fantastic.
I love the fact that drag's a performance style that they have gone, yes, I can do this. I can see this, and I can use this to tell stories about me, and stories about the world as I see it, which is important. Yeah, I love all performance, but drag has been the one that just captures my heart. But I don't like it when it's I don't like the RuPaul's Drag Race drag that much, because it's stylized and it's American, and it's not about the performance, it's about the look. And it's also, people are told that they can't do it, and I'm like, no, bollocks, everyone can do it.
It's interesting that hasn't shifted yet. It will
Yeah, the Boulet brothers, they've started to move the dial.
Yes.
Because I mean, was it Landon Cider winning it?
Yeah, I mean, that was...
Sorry if that's a spoiler to anyone. Seriously, please, watch the Boulet, watch Dragula, and just fall in love with Landon Cider.
I mean, but even, like, in the first episode, you're like, yeah, Landon's winning this. Yeah, so, like, it's not really a spoiler.
But it's also, you see the different bodies and the different stories that they have on in Tao. They're telling similar stories to what's being told through the casting on RuPaul's Drag Race. They're telling stories about the mental health problems, the drug problems that fall from those mental health problems, the problems growing up in different styles of household, the being able to come out at 10 or 12, the never being able to come out to your parents in your 30s kind of stories. They're telling those, and those stories are still being told, but they're being told not just by stereotypical bodies in a stereotypical way. They're being told in a different way. And you know, some of the stuff especially from the last season of Dragula, I was amazed at how open and honest people were about where they'd been, where their mental health had taken them to, and that to me is really powerful as well. It's saying to people, you don't have to try to be normal. You don't have to try to look like you're coping when you're not coping. If you're not coping, tell people you're not coping. Because we should be the sort of community that can not stand around and ignore somebody, but can stand around somebody and help them and protect them and support them when they're going through that sort of stuff. And those are the best communities. I mean, those are the communities that you build in spaces like Her Upstairs, and that was the community that I bumped into. See, I did better than you did. I did better than you did in bringing it around.
I was gonna do it. So okay. So let's talk about that then.
Yeah.
So safe to say, not the best time in your life.
Pretty much.
Emotionally.
Emotionally. mental health wise either.
And you made the journey from South London into North London, because of that connection with Family Fierce, or
because of that connection with the Family Fierce, because of that connection with Meth and Joe, and Ruby and Lolo, and pretty much all of the Family Fierce. I've got a connection with them, and that also that love of seeing them do different things, seeing them try different things. I mean, yeah, just seeing them try different ways of being from the stage as well. Talk about different experiences. Again, sometimes it wasn't for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So
the performances, one of the best nights that I went to, or one of the best comedy nights that I went to up there was Femmes of Colour, or FOC, F-O-C. It's predominantly people of colour on stage. Oh, it is always people of colour on stage, predominantly people of colour in the audience. I don't get about a third of the jokes. That doesn't worry me in the slightest, because it's not for me. I'm not the intended audience. I just happen to be along there and really enjoying it and being a supporter, but I'm not who the night is for. And that's a difference as well, of just being aware sometimes the performances aren't for you, so you might not get all the references. That's okay. It's people,
especially if it's a Harry Potter night. I mean,
oh no. I'm enough of a geek. If it was a Lord of the Rings night, I had them all completely nailed.
And so what did that, at that time in your life, what did that space represent to you?
A refuge. A place where I belonged that wasn't just my house. Like, I would go from home to work, and couldn't really socialise very well at times. And then this was a place where I felt like I belonged, and I would go along, and even if I didn't know people, I could talk to people. So I met amazing people up there, and I'm staying in touch with a lot of them because of the connections that we made, because it was somewhere where we would meet up, and it might be once a week, might be once a month. We'd bump into each other up there, and we'd just catch up on where life had been. And if you weren't in a good space, there'd be somebody there who would just go, "Oh, you're not in a good space. Gin."
I know the solution.
Gin, dance, laugh, feel like you belong to something. It's that, I called it living room, a space where you could go, where you could be yourself, where you didn't have to have walls up, where you didn't have to, you could just live. And that's rare to find those spaces where we as queers can just live, because we're constantly having to be something else, or fighting against a corner, or feeling isolated. Whereas this is a space where you could go and be with other people, and you could live, and you could be with other people who were just living. And for those couple of hours, you would have that space where it was like, yeah, the world out there, it's going to be a bit weird, it's going to be a bit crazy. The world in here, we're all just living. We're all just getting through it. But we're seeing each other. We're seeing who each other is. You're not having to pretend to be cis or straight or less queer than what you are. You're not having to hide the mental health. You're not having to hide all of that stuff. You can just be yourself. And that's such a rare thing, and you find that occasionally, and I found that again up in that space. And some nights it was there more than others. It's never a permanent sensation, but when it's there, it's those moments that just allow you to go, yeah, this is where I can live. I'm not having to shut things off.
This space. Yeah. And so it was quite short lived, this event.
Yeah. I think it's about all in all, including the block bar, it's around about 2 years, just a bit over 2 years, I think. And when you were talking about spaces to talk about, I was like, to me, that's important, that it was a space that is really short, but within everyone's, and if I say living memory, it's a space where I bump into people and they're like, I remember you from her upstairs. and we can start talking. Whereas if you talk about things that are maybe 15, 20 years old, you don't quite have that same connection, or you end up with this sense that the younger queers don't lose spaces, but a lot of the spaces are still pop-up spaces. It's nice to have had a space that lasted just long enough to really build an audience, to build a culture, to build a way of being.
Yeah.
And it's sad that it closed, but it's also all of those ideas have spread out. Those ideas of how you run a space.
There's a legacy for
how
that.
you bring people into it, how you create spaces, how you make space for people, has all been spread out, which to me is really an important legacy of it.
And so are you saying that that was done differently in this venue?
I think so. As a producer, putting the disclaimer on, there are different ways of bringing minority people into your performance nights and into your nights and into your events and into your spaces. And it's almost different ways of allyship as well, or supporterism. I don't like allyship. I don't like the notion of allies, because it's got a transactional, I'll be your ally as long as you're not too angry, or I'll be your ally. I would love to be. You have one of the things that's been said to me. I really, really admire your passion and your ideas, but the way that you represent them really takes away from your message.
What?
And that's from an ally. And that's where I find allyship breaks down, because it's not about allowing you the space to do the things that you need to do and to be the thing that you are. It's saying allyship is if you fall within this box.
Yes.
And this is what can happen sometimes as a producer, unintentionally. You bring people in because you want to give people space, but you don't bring them in a way that gives them the autonomy and agency and allows them to build their skills.
Yeah.
So this was an idea that I did with Queerest of the Queer, and I know, talking with Jo, that they did with her upstairs, of giving people the space, not just as the performers, but as the technicians, as the people organising the space. Just provide the building, provide the bar, and they're responsible for everything else. You'll help them if they want your help. They'll go, how do I make this tech deck work? And you're like, okay, it's volume this way, that way to move between the two decks. Remember that if Jay is DJing, because they'll suddenly go, why is this not playing? And they've forgotten to slide it from one deck to the other. I'm a bad DJ. But it's those things which allows people to become technicians, allows people to become producers. It allows people to figure out how to build a night, how to program a night. Who do I put on first? If I tell somebody how to program a night, it doesn't help them know how to program a night. It doesn't, and it also doesn't allow them to have their voice of saying, actually, I think it should go this way round, because I think that these pieces work better this way round. And I think this is the thing that should happen before the interval, and this is the thing that should be the finale, and this is the bring people back in the room. That's giving people the ability to try that is super important. And if you say, as a producer, oh, I've got to have 2 people of colour at this night, and you literally just put them into your lineup in various spaces, that's not allowing them to grow in the same way as if you say, hey, would you like to produce a night for me? Here's the sort of things that you'd need to do. Would you feel comfortable doing that? I can provide you any help that you need. And that's the 2 different models. And I think that model of allowing people to grow their skills has meant that even though her upstairs closed, its effects are felt everywhere. You know, I see Femmes of Colour popping up in different venues. I see some of the nights that used to run. Cocoa Butter Club has gone from strength to strength to strength. Now, Sadie was already a fantastic performer, but they've been able to build crews and build people and build those support things to make nights happen, because they had the space to try things out. Lads also doing the same, you know, and it's about allowing people to try this stuff.
So do you remember hearing that it was closing?
Yeah, it was a real shock when it closed. It was totally unexpected for pretty much everybody, I think, involved, or for most of the people involved.
Mm-hmm. So how did it feel?
Awful. But it was also awful because I know Meth and Joe. I know how much pain they were in, and that made it even worse of seeing people you know and love being in so much pain and being incapable of doing anything to help, to soothe, to do anything, other than offer texts and platitudes, which is what you do. But it was awful, and it was one of those moments. And it wasn't just the two of them; it was everyone else who I knew who was working there, who was up there, who was. It was just bereavement. It was, and I hate to say it was like a sudden death, but it was almost that whole thing of like you still turn around and go, oh, yeah, that happened. And it did take a while of grieving. It was a place where I saw people get married. It was a place where I saw people being celebrated. It was a place where I met people. Some of the significant people in my life now I met there. And that hurts. That there isn't just that same space. I won't walk in and walk across the room and see them sitting or standing in that particular physical space.
Yeah.
With the very wonky floorboards. But I know that I now see them in other spaces. Yeah.
And what do you think London has lost?
It's lost a young space, a space that was very queer identified. It's lost a space that was really intersectional, and I'm using that in that way of like all different identities were rocking up there and trying things out and testing things out, and sometimes those identities didn't get along that well, and it was about negotiating the space. I think it's also, the fact that it was open, by the end it was open 7 nights a week, and there was a space for queers to perform 7 nights a week. Like in 2005, when I arrived here, there was one queer night a week, and maybe one club night a month. And then with the Glory, VFD, Dalston Superstore, her upstairs, some nights at the RVT, you're talking 5 things potentially happening 7 nights of the week. That to me is, and then you've got all the other smaller venues, as tiny pop-up venues and things like that as well. But to lose somewhere that was just unashamedly queer 7 nights of the week, that would literally put on stuff that, not that it didn't seem to matter how it went, but it had a very queer sensibility about it.
Did you ever go to her upstairs?